multifamily today. I got up like 15 minutes ago, so just beware. This is The Knight in Shining Armor by Obsolescence. I recognize that name. Shining Armor had known early on what his destiny was. Ever since his mother had brought him that pretend guard's pony costume and dressed him up in it, he'd known. He'd stood by Twilight in front of the mirror, wearing that brass-plated armor and cheap straw plume, and he imagined it as a true golden armor of the Royal Canterlot Guards. And he liked the sound of that idea. The colt right there in that reflection. Maybe he looked like the Royal Guard material. Maybe he would grow up and keep the princess safe from bad guys someday. Why not? "Your name's Shining Armor," Twilight had said. "That's not a baker or a tailor name. That's a guard name." It had started out small at first, going out to the square on marching drills, clanking about in his little guard's pony costume, trying to copy the precise mechanical motions of the real guards while they paraded past him. He read bedtime stories to Twilight about the adventures of the brave Sir Gallopad, and he called her his princess, while she called him her knight. But the dream got bigger as he grew older. He started practicing his magic, training to keep himself fit, studying himself into exhaustion. Anything and everything it would take. It meant saying no to Twilight sometimes, resisting her puppy-dog eyes when she asked to play with him. But the Royal Guards only wanted the best. They wouldn't accept some sad excuse about how he had to go and play catch with his sister instead of perfecting his spellcasting. He'd always felt a little guilty about that, but if Twilight resented it for him, she didn't let it show. In fact, she only seemed to get prouder of him. "My big brother's gonna be a Royal Guard someday," she'd say to whoever would listen. "He's that good!" Shining Armor never denied it, even though he knew it sounded arrogant. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears had gone into making him that good. Twilight trusted that all the time he'd spent practicing instead of playing with her had gone toward a good cause. And with all the hard work he'd done, he couldn't help but feel like he was just a little deserving of that trust. If his own baby sister, dear little Twilight, could believe him, well, he didn't see harm in believing in himself, too. Yet here he was now, at the door to the princess's office, the highest-scoring applicant the Royal Guards had ever seen. Just on the brink of living his dream, and somehow no longer sure he was ready. "All right, let's go," he said to himself. "I can do this." He turned to the doorknob slowly and opened the door. The heavy fragrances of jasmine and rosewater washed over him, making him feel just a bit lightheaded. The smell wasn't exactly unpleasant, far from it, actually. It was just so powerful and overwhelming that for a second Shining Armor wasn't quite sure what to make of it. It seemed to him as if he'd opened a portal to another world altogether. "Is that you, Shining Armor?" rang the crystal-clear voice of Princess Celestia. "Do come in and have a seat." Slowly, Shining Armor stepped into the room. He gasped softly as the princess came into view, and he felt like his legs would give right out under him. He'd seen her before at parades and parties, of course, with her golden tiara, flowing rainbow mane, but he'd never actually met her in person. And seeing her there, in all her glory, as real and majestic as the sun itself, was almost too much for him to bear. It will be my job to defend her. For the first time, the full weight of what he was agreeing to came down on him. "Well?" she asked him. Sit down. We have much to discuss." Yes, princess," he said, taking one of the chairs from in front of the princess's desk. "Try to relax," she said softly, giving him a playful little smile. "I'm not going to eat you." Yes, princess." Her voice was so soothing and calm that Shining Armor did feel himself starting to relax. It reminded him of how his mother had used to sing him lullabies when he'd been afraid of the dark at night. His heart stopped pounding in his chest, and he sat a little less rigidly in his chair. "Wow," he whispered, deeply in awe at how easily she had steadied his nerves. "Don't worry too much about it. Every pony gets nervous." She smiled again, and Shining Armor realized that he was smiling too. "I trust you know why you're here, at least." Article 16 of the Guard's Recruitment Manual," Shining Armor recited. "Before an applicant is accepted into the Royal Canterlot Guard, he must have a private meeting with the princess as final confirmation of his willingness to serve." "You've memorized it?" Celestia laughed. It sounded beautiful, like the chiming of bells. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Top of your class at the academy, top scores on the guards exams, and top in everything else that matters. Quite the prodigy, as I've heard." Shining Armor blushed. He hadn't expected Princess Celestia to know so much about him. "I try, Princess," he said quietly. "Modest," she said. "I like that." "Thank you, Princess." The initial shock of meeting the princess had left Shining Armor in full now, and he was starting to feel a bit less awkward in speaking to her. She wasn't quite the unapproachable goddess that he'd imagined. She was the caring and kind, and in some ways small. Shining Armor thought that it might be possible to comprehend her if he tried hard enough. At least he was no longer making a fool out of himself in front of her. He considered that a solid step in the right direction. Then something shifted. The princess's smile faded, and in its place came a sort of thoughtful look. She sighed, as if she were preparing herself for what she was about to say to him. "You can still turn back if you want." "I'm sorry?" he asked. He wasn't quite certain he'd heard her correctly. Surely she wasn't suggesting that he'd quit. Not now, after everything he'd been to get through this far. "The life of a royal guard is difficult," she said gloomily. "It would be wrong of me to let you join without understanding that." He felt his cheeks go hot with anger. Did she think he didn't already know how tough it was to be a royal guard? Did she not realize that he'd already dedicated everything to this dream of his? Didn't she understand that he'd lay down his life to protect her if she asked him to? He took a deep breath and reined himself in. No. Of course she knew all that. "I don't care, Princess," he said simply. "I'll do whatever you ask me to do. I'll face whatever you tell me to." He looked at her pleadingly, only vaguely aware of how desperate he sounded. "I just want to be part of the guard." She gazed steadily at him, eyes patient and unmoved, and it struck Shining Armor how many stallions must have stood in this office over all the centuries, telling her exactly the same things as he was telling her. "You have a family, don't you?" she asked him. I don't understand what you mean." "Don't you have a family?" she repeated. "I do." "Are you close to your mother and father?" "I'm old enough to leave home, Princess." "How about your little sister?" Shining Armor could feel a void opening in his chest. He could sense where this conversation was going, and he didn't like it. "Twilight Sparkle?" "So I've heard," said the princess. "My niece always has the most wonderful praise for her. She tells me all the time that Twilight is a gem among fillies." "Cadence said that?" "Among other things," the princess responded. "She also says that Twilight loves her big brother very much." "She does," said Shining Armor. The void in his chest grew a tiny bit wider. "I'm her big brother best friend forever." He realized how silly that must have sounded to the princess. "That's what she calls me anyway," he hastily added. "You understand that you won't be able to see her much if you become a royal guard?" And there it was, out in the open. There wasn't a lot of room for family in the life of the royal guard. They had their own barracks in the castle, close by the princess where they lived, ate and slept. And vacations were rare. It was a full-time job. Shining Armor knew that accepting it meant leaving Twilight all by herself. She'd still have her mom and dad and Princess Cadence, but not her big brother. Not outside of the occasional visit or letter. He wouldn't be there anymore to tuck her in bed at night, or teach her how to skip rope like she'd been begging him to. He wouldn't be able to talk to her when she wouldn't speak to any other pony, or get her nose out of a book so she could eat dinner. He'd still be able to see her sometimes, but as a stranger. It wouldn't be nearly as much as she needed from him. And the most terrifying thought of all? What if he died in service, and never came back at all. He'd always imagined Twilight, tears in her eyes, shouting at him, "You said you'd be my big brother, best friend forever! You promised!" "I didn't tell her that," he said sadly. "I didn't think she could take it." "And do you think it will be any better once she finds out? She's going to want to know why her big brother's no longer going to be around for her. She's going to ask why Shining Armor can't come home for Heartwarming's Eve. She's going to—" "Don't you think I've thought of that?" Shining Armor yelled. And then he realized who he was speaking to. His mouth fell open in horror. I'm so sorry, Princess. It's just, I don't know, Twilight, I mean. She's my little sister, and she means a lot to me." Celestia raised an eyebrow, but said nothing about his outburst. Shining Armor considered that extremely gracious of her, more gracious than he deserved. "Go on," she said. "I guess sometimes I think she needs me too much. She doesn't talk to any pony her age, doesn't get her nose out of a book unless I ask her to. It feels like, because she has me, she doesn't see the point in having friends of her own." Even as he said it, it sounded like a terrible, awful, horrible lie. An excuse so that he could choose himself over his own baby sister, and not feel selfish for it. The argument had seemed so right and reasonable when he'd used it against himself the night before. But now, in front of Princess Celestia, it all felt like a sham. "And I guess whatever happens, I'm not going to be there for her forever. She's going to need to find her own way through the world someday, and I keep asking myself if she can do that while she's she's still got me to lean on. Maybe it'll be good for her that I'm leaving." The princess looked at him, her face impassive. "And you truly believe that?" she asked. "It's all that keeps me going," he admitted. But then he thought about it some more, and he couldn't just help but wonder if there was a glimmer of truth in what he just said. What would Twilight do with her life if she thought she could spend it all sheltered behind him, never learning to fly a kite or ride a scooter unless he taught her? Would she grow up a lonely old mare who'd only have her books and her brother to keep her company? Was he actually doing her a favor by leaving and letting her stand on her own four hooves for once? Or is that just another rationalization? "I just want what's best for my baby sister," he said. "I'd give this up in a heartbeat if, except I don't know what's best for her. I just don't know what's best for me." "I understand," said the princess, and by some miracle of empathy, it sounded as if she really did know the feeling. "It's not easy having a little sister, is it?" "I guess not, Princess." Celestia nodded in sympathy. "She's going to miss you terribly, isn't she?" "She is." "And you'll miss her too, won't you?" "More than anything." "Well," she said, "that's not bad, nor unexpected. Almost every guard now serving has had to make the choice between duty and family, and all of them have found it a difficult decision." She laughed. "Truth be told, I wouldn't accept you if you didn't think it was a hard choice." "It is a hard choice, Princess." "I know, and you'll have to make it anyway. You're very talented, Shining Armor, there's no doubting that. But it's not enough to be the best. You need to be committed. It does you no good to become a guard if you know you'll regret it for the rest of your life. So I'll ask you now, do you still want to join the Royal Guards?" This is it, the moment of truth. He could become a Royal Guard now if he wanted. He just had to say yes, and that would be it. He'd inducted into the Royal Guards, and they'd give him his armor, the golden armor. He'd have everything he'd ever worked for in his life, everything he'd ever wanted since he put on that old guard's pony costume. Everything except his sister, little Twilight. The room was quiet, the princess silent, waiting for his answer, and him silent, trying to figure out what his answer would be. "I do," he said at last, a lump forming in his throat. I still want to join. I want to wear the golden armor. I want to protect you and all of Equestria. I want that." He swallowed down the lump and added, "I've always wanted that." The princess said nothing. "But I don't think I'm ready for it right now. I've still got a baby sister who needs me, and maybe there'll be a day when I can only help her by not being there for her. but it's not here yet, and I want to spend as much time with her as I can until it comes." The princess smiled at him. "I think that's the right choice," she said, and it felt like the right choice. "I think so too, Princess. Why don't you come back in a year or so, and we'll talk again then? The royal guards are always on the lookout for bright young stallions, such as yourself." "Of course, Princess," he said. Yeah, he could always come back and join the royal guards later, but he'd only have Twilight for so long. There'd be no second chances once she'd grown up, so he figured he could put his destiny on hold if that meant making her happy. He was first and foremost a big brother, best friend forever. That wasn't going to change anytime soon. And it was only a year, right? "I think this meeting is over then," said the princess. "It's been a pleasure." "The pleasure is mine, Princess," he said. With her permission, he got up from his seat and made for the door. He looked behind just before he walked out and said, "You know I'll be back." The princess winked at him. "That's what we're counting on." He laughed. He genuinely laughed, and for the first time since he walked into the princess's office, he shut the door behind him. And that was that. He found Twilight sitting alone in the lobby, reading through her unabridged copy of The Canterlot Tales. She didn't notice him at first. "Hey, sis," he said, giving her a little shove. "Time to go." "Big brother!" she cheered. She dropped her book and gave him a hug. "Did you get in? Are you a royal guard now? Are you? Are you?" "Nah," he said. "Not yet." "What?" Twilight screamed, causing some of the other ponies to stare at her. "But that's not fair! They said you got the highest test scores ever! That's what they said, didn't they? That's not fair!" He smiled and rustled her mane up a bit, just like he always did. "It's not about test scores, sis," he said. "Now let's go home. We've got a lot to talk about." Well, that was interesting. Tired face. Sorry for reading weirdly.
But it made my voice lower because it's earlier in the morning.
And then I can go like this and strain my voice, and
And it's like this.
because apparently my voice is lower for when I'm
In the morning early.
Yes, yeah. And that song you heard, that was My Big Brother, Best Friend. And I just tried to say that I was playing it. I didn't realize that it actually had any general connection. It was like... Electric reasons I probably did everything together. And then it's we shared our dreams. My big brother, best friend, forever, forever. And then it's like